everyone, and welcome to the part 2 of how to make an inbuilt Victorian corset dress. If you've not been following, for the first part, we drafted the basic bodice block and altered it to create our Victorian corset, our inbuilt Victorian corset. Now, if you've not watched it, kindly do so. I'll put up the card up on the screen. In this video, I'll be altering the back pattern so you can have the option to put your eyelets or your lacing loops and to give you a more snatched waist. I'll start off by taking out the waist dart on my back pattern. This is because I'm going to be creating a new center back line for my back pattern. Since I'm no longer working with a zip, to create my new center back line from my original center back line, which is indicated with a marker, I would go in on my new dress length, that's on my new corset length now, which is 4 inches from my waistline. You can make yours 5 inches but no more than, so it doesn't get to your hip line. On my new waist length, I would go in from the center back 2 inches or 2.5 inches, but for the sake of this tutorial I'll be working with 2 inches. Then on my chest line, which is where my yoke would end, I'll go in about 3 inches to, you can make yours 4 inches if you're on the big side. I'll connect these two lines with a straight ruler. This line would mark my new center back line, and the part I am shading out would be the panel I would cut out for my back piece. Remember the dart we erased, the 1 inch waist dart? I'll be measuring the remaining part of my pattern to get the midpoint, and I would get the midpoint and this midpoint to serve as my new dart line. On that line now, I will take out my waist dart of 1 inch. On this straight line, which I got by dividing the rest of my back pattern into two, I would be taking my waist dart of 1 inch, so that's ½ inch on both sides of this dart line. I'll connect the top of the dart to the chest line and the bottom to the length of my pattern, which is the new waist length. I'm cross-checking my pattern to make sure I'm getting my measurements correctly. At this point, if you want multiple panels at your back, this is going to give us 2 panels. If you want something like 3 panels, you measure the rest of your pattern and divide by 3 instead of 2. I'll go to my yoke now and create a style at the center back for my yoke. After cross-checking my measurement, I'll cut out my back pattern now. I'll cut through in this manner and I'll cut through on the original center back line. Next is to separate the back yoke from the back bodice pattern. Our back yoke ends on the chest line, and so I'll be cutting it like this. So this pattern is the pattern for the main back bodice. I'll also label it one. I'm having 2 pattern pieces at my back, and I'll be having the side back and the center back. The other piece is labeled panel because this is what I will use to cover the opening at my center back. On the yoke now, I would go and trim out the style I cut for the center back yoke. As you can see, this is what your pattern should look like when you are done cutting. I'll also notch my waistline so while I'm cutting on fabric, I will not make mistakes. If you watch the part 1 video, you will know that we reduced our waist measurement because of the snatching we're going to do. And so is that new waist measurement I'll use to cut a new skirt pattern for my corset, because you can't use your actual waist. You have already cut your pattern according to your new waist measurements. Likewise, you have to cut the remaining part of your dress, which is the skirt part, with your new waist measurement. I'll be altering this basic skirt block I have here. You can watch that when it drops later. I will also be altering this skirt pattern to give a full body contour, so do well to check it out when it drops. At this point, I'll be measuring my corset, both front and back pattern, and use the new waist measurement to cut out the skirt pattern. Next thing I'll be cutting is the sleeve pattern. If you notice, the design had 2 different types of sleeves: a short puffy sleeve, slightly puffy sleeve, and a longer sleeve. The long sleeve measurement will be my full sleeve length, and for the short sleeve I'll work with a measurement of a length of 8 to 9 inch. To prevent this video from getting too long, I'll be dropping this part as a separate video on how to cut your basic sleeve pattern. Kindly turn on your post notifications so you can be notified when that video drops. I'll proceed to cut the short sleeve on my pattern directly. So the length I'll be working with is 8 inches plus 1 inch folding allowance. I'll rule this with a straight line. The first line is my margin, the second line is my cap height, and the third line is my sleeve length. So from the margin, I'll be exceeding it by 1 inch because I want it to have a little bit of gathers on the top. On the third line, which is my sleeve length, I'll measure my round arm measurement plus 2 inches because I want it to be a little bit free at the bottom plus the sewing allowance. I'm going to cut this out now and I will notch out the front and the back so I do not make mistakes when I'm sewing, and I'll also notch the center top of my sleeves. If you don't know how to cut directly on fabric, kindly do so on pattern and transfer to your fabric. Like I said earlier, I want the top of my sleeves to have a little bit of gathers. That's what I'm just illustrating for you to see. I'll be using the full sleeve pattern to cut my long sleeve with this lace fabric. For this sleeve, I'll be altering the sleeve style. I want it to have a little bit of a boat shape on the bottom of the sleeve. And so I'll do that on my sleeve pattern and I'll be showing you. On my sleeve pattern now, from the bottom, I'll be going in 5 to 6 inches depending on where you want your sleeve to start getting wide from. And then on this line, I would rule straight across and then I'll mark the center line of my sleeve. That's from the top of my sleeve to the bottom of my sleeve, the midpoint. From this point now, I would slash through the straight vertical and slash line through the horizontal line as well, like I am doing on the screen. When I'm done slashing through, I'll pin my pattern on my fabric and measure. On the horizontal line of my main sleeve pattern, I would make a measurement of 2.5 inches from the midpoint to touch the top of the spread pieces. While I cut, I'm adding my 1 inch sewing allowance on both sides of my sleeve pattern. With a curved ruler, I'll be connecting the two spread pieces on the bottom length of my sleeve and then I'll cut. After cutting, I would take out time to notch the front piece and the back piece and then the center of my sleeve. This is what it looks like after cutting. I've proceeded to cut the front and back yoke with the lace fabric. Since I will be cutting my skirt piece directly on fabric, I would be folding my fabric into two and I'll be giving a smaller part for the front piece and a larger amount for the back piece. This is because I have zipper at the back. The front piece is going to be the part on fold and I'm simply ruling a straight line across to mark for the start of my waistline. Next, I'll proceed to rule my hip length, which is 8 inches from my waistline, and I'll rule a straight line across for my front and back pattern. From the hip line, I'll be measuring about 7 to 8 inches. This will mark for my contour. I'll also indicate my knee length from the waistline. This skirt is going to be a really pencil skirt, so I'm going in with a knee shaping of 5 inches. That's 2 inches on the side front and side back and 1 inch on the center back. You can make yours smaller than this if you will not be comfortable walking in it. However, this is actually comfortable to walk in. Going ahead to place my waist measurement divided by 4 on the side, my hip measurement divided by 4, and then from the knee shaping, I connected with a curved ruler from my contour, which is 7 inches from my hip line to my knee length, and then I connected with the straight ruler to the length of my skirt. I'll repeat the same process for the back piece, but I'll be taking out half an inch on the waistline from the center back and connecting it back to my hip line and completing my contour like I did for the front, but I'll be taking 1 inch instead. And then I'll rule a straight line to connect to the bottom of my skirt hem. I will add my sewing allowance of 1 inch on center back and side back and front, and then half inch on the top of the waistline, and also my folding allowance on the hem of the skirt. On the front waistline, you will know that the front waistline is curved, so I'll go down half of an inch in the center front and connect to the side front of my skirt pattern. I'll add my sewing allowance of half of an inch and cut through for the front and the back. I'll also notch my hip line. I'll notch my zip allowance so I do not make any mistakes while I'm cutting. I usually advise that before you cut your body's pattern, you interface your fabric and then you place your pattern and cut. This is because if you cut your pattern first before you interface, there's a possibility that your fabric will shrink. So after cutting with the Ankara fabric, I'm going to be placing it to cut with the lace. I'll be laying the lace fabric over the Ankara fabric. While I do that, I will notch the top of my pattern and the waistline of my pattern so I do not make mistakes while sewing. This is what your pattern piece should look like when you're done cutting. And usually you can decide to add extra wording or interfacing to give it more structure. As you can see, I've notched the underbust area, and so you can add your interfacing or your wording around these areas I have marked with the chalk. For me, like I said, this design is going to have a lace overlay on top of my Ankara fabric. I would go ahead and do the same for all the pattern pieces of the corset. So if you're doing like I'm doing, you would go out to your fabric, to your sewing machine, and then you sew the lace on top of your Ankara fabric. So I'm just showing this pattern to show you how you'll be joining your corset. You're going to be joining the center front of the front to the side front, and for the center back to the side back. Don't forget to knot your pattern pieces so you do not make mistakes while sewing. So I'll pin the arranged patterns together and take to my sewing machine. After joining the pieces together, you press properly and let make sure your seam is this flat. You notch as well, and then you trim the excess seam allowance so your fabric is not bulky. You go ahead to press the front and repeat this for all the pattern pieces that you have joined. Up next is the lining piece. As you can see, for the pattern of the front, I've joined the two side piece that will cut out together. Since I didn't take any darts on the waistline, I can join it together. And so I've cut it as one piece. So my lining is just having three individual pieces. I've gone ahead to join it. And usually you can do bust caging on your lining or put interfacing, but I just chose not to because I did not want this tutorial to be too long. So from the under bust area, you can just mark out where you can put your interfacing, your bra cup, or your bust caging. My panel piece of my body's pattern is the only Ankara fabric that would not have a lace overlay on it. So I only cut this fabric with a lining fabric, and I cut it on fold. I also increased the wideness by 2 inches so as to make it wide enough to cover my back. Then half inch for sewing allowance on the side, on the top, and on the bottom. Now there's a particular way you have to sew your back pattern if you're using a panel, and I'll be explaining it to you. On my side back and center back pieces, the part I used a chalk to indicate would be the wrong side of my fabric. Usually this side will have interfacing if you're working with an interfacing on your lining fabric. You can also see I have indicated on the waistline for both my center back and my side back piece, and also the panel. The first step you want to do is to turn your panel fabric with your lining. You're going to turn the top and you're going to turn the bottom and one of the sides. You turn it out through the side that you did not sew, and this is on my left hand side. And before you join your center back to your side back piece, you would sandwich your panel piece in between your lining, and then you sew it. You sandwich it, meaning that your panel piece is going to be in between your center back and your side back for one part of your lining. Remember, the part of the lining you can see that has the panel paper is the part that is going to have interfacing. It's going to be the wrong side of your fabric. So when you are done sewing, it's going to look neat like this on both your center back and your side back. Next thing I'm going to be showing you is how to use your bra cup on your lining piece. Remember, if you do your bust caging on your lining, there's no need for this part, so you can skip this part. So I'll take my ready-made bra cup and go in by half inch and take a dart of half an inch from the bottom of my bra cup to the apex of my bra cup. That's the middle point of my bra cup. I'll take it to my sewing machine and sew the dart. I have done exactly just that, and this is what it should look like. As you can see on my pattern, I've notched my under bust and my bust point. So I'll take the bra cup now and place it on my under bust, making sure the dart line, the tip of the dart line meets my bust point. I'll take it to my sewing machine and sew round the edges of my bra cup, or I can also use a hand needle to stitch round it. I'll do the same for the other side of the corset. Place my fabric on top, my main piece fabric on top, to give you a rough idea of what it should look like. You can see how it looks like now. So also note that when you're ironing your main piece or your lining piece, kindly make sure you use a bust ham or mold to iron properly so it gives more structure to your outfit. If you have a body form, this will be much easy for you to do, but ignore the main dress on the mannequin. I'm just doing this because there will be no excuse for you not to be able to make this outfit on your own. Likewise, you can just do bust caging. Start from the under bust line where the chalk is and do your bust caging around the bust area and stop about 3 inches from the side piece. For my center back piece, I'll be using loops instead of eyelet. So what I'm doing now is just taking out my seam allowance and marking out where I want my loop to be before I turn it with lining. I'll notch this pieces together and get my loop and start to place it on the center back. If you don't have a steam iron, a burst ham, or whatever, this method is for you. You can say I have a homemade ham or burst mold, and then you can get water and just sprinkle and use your regular iron. Don't forget to place fabric on your seam allowance so you iron it and you do not burn your main fabric. And so you make sure you press it, so you iron it and press your dress very well on your burst mold so it gives it structure. Remember, if you use an interfacing, a stronger word in here, or you do your boss caging, it's going to have more structure than mine has. As you can see, I did not use any extra interfacing, but I suggest you go ahead and do so, especially if you're a bigger size person. As you can see, mine already has a little bit of structure. This is the back pieces of the corset, and I've gone ahead to put the loops on both sides of the back piece. Remember, I said I wouldn't be using eyelets. If you're using an eyelet, you can skip this process and just go ahead to turn your back pieces with the lining pieces. Next is the boning channels. I'll be using the Ankara fabric to create boning channels for all the seam allowance except the side seam allowance. What I did is just to cut a fabric piece of 1 inch. I used my pressing iron to press one side into a fold, and so the other open side I'll be sewing with 1/2 inch, and I will turn it like this and sew on top of the folded part. Now, if you have a bias tape maker, you can easily do this. It will make your work easier. I'm stitching with the allowance of 1/4 inch. I'm doing so in such a way that when I'm done sewing now and I turn it, I will be able to sew on top of the right side of my boning channel. I also did this in such a way that it will be able to fit in my boning. So you can measure your boning to see how many inches wide your boning channel needs to be. I went ahead to stitch with less than 1/4 inch. You do this for all the places you want a boning channel on, and then you go ahead to put in your boning. This is what my contoured skirt looks like after joining the sides together. You take your steam iron and press properly while you on your sewing allowance and on the right side of your fabric when you are done joining. You repeat the same process for the lining fabric. I am using a half length lining fabric, that is, it's not getting to the full length of my dress. The lining piece is going to end somewhere around my knee length or above my knee length. I'm going in for another press for all the corset pieces before I attach the yoke and join the sides together, then turn with a full lining. This is what they look like after being ironed together, and then don't forget the waist we notched, and that's what I'll be using to join them together. But before that, I'll be putting in my yoke on the neckline for both the back and the front pieces. After putting the yoke, I've successfully used the lining to turn both the front and the back pieces together and to give it a very clean finishing. Next thing I'll be doing is to put my boning in my boning channel. I didn't do it earlier because I wanted the dress to be more flexible. You can see this is how the boning comes. It comes in this round form. I'll be pressing it with a pressing iron, a steam iron precisely, so as to make it straight and easy to use on my corset. As you can see, before I attached my yoke, I used the bias to turn the open part of the back piece. I joined my shoulder and I will be using a bias to turn the neckline round. I didn't cut two pieces of my lace fabric because I didn't want it to be too thick. But if you're using a lighter fabric like two nets, you can decide to use two fabric to turn it as well. I like to measure each of the boning channels and cut the amount of boning I'll need. In this case, I needed 3 yards plus worth of boning. I'll measure this and cut it and use a steam iron to press it to become straight. Also, please don't iron directly on the boning, it would melt because it is plastic. I'll proceed to cut the boning for each boning channel, and I'll be burning each part that I cut so as to prevent it from sticking out of my fabric. I'll repeat this process for all the boning channels I have on my corset. Now that I'm done, the next thing I'll do is to attach the main fabric with the lining fabric at the bottom. I'll achieve this by using a technique called piping with a bias tape. In my case, I'm using Ankara fabric, so I just cut about 1 inch or 1.5 inch and I used it to turn from the right side of my main Ankara fabric to the right side of my lining fabric inside. The next part is to work on my sleeve. Last minute, I decided to change the style of my sleeve to something like this and to sort of match the long sleeve pattern. After I cut this, I'll use a lining to turn it from the bottom to the top, and then I will do my gathers at the top of my sleeves. I'll attach it to the long sleeve and join it to the corset. And this is what it looks like when I'm done lacing the back and attaching the sleeves. The next thing I will be working on is the skirt part of the corset. Remember, this is a dress that has an inbuilt Victorian corset. We're done with the corset part. Next thing we're going to work on is attaching the skirt to the corset. Before I proceed, at this point, if you have someone to assist you, you can kindly call on the person to help you while you are trying to work on achieving the style line on the waist. So you put this on like a regular skirt, and then you come to the front and try and cut out the style line that you desire. If you have somebody at this point, the person should help you to cut the style line. In my own case, I'll be using a chalk to mark it out, and then when I take it out, I would cut it. So on one side of my waistline, I came down about 3 inches and I slanted it to the original waistline. And then on the seam allowance, I just connected it like this. At this point, I'm cross-checking my measurements before I proceed to sew it with a hand needle. Now there are different options to do this. You can either sew with a hand needle or you use your sewing machine if you're using a sewable boning. In my own case, what I'll do is I'll take out the skirt part now and cut out the style line and turn the top with my lining fabric. As you can see, I'll turn all the edges and it should be neat like this. You also turn your zip and your zip allowance. What I will do is to take it back, try it on again, and use pins to hold it on my corset before I place it on my sewing machine and sew together. If you've gotten to this portion of this video and you've not liked it, kindly do so, as this would help my YouTube channel grow, and you can also share to other people who you think would find this useful as well. Thank you. You can see I've attached it now to the corset and I would be repeating the same procedure. I'll be using pins now to hold it in place. After this, you can substitute it for your with your sewing machine or with your hand needle, whichever is convenient for you. Now that I'm done doing all that, you can see how it looks, and look at the skirt contour. Can you see how it is bringing out the shape of this outfit really nicely? To finalize, I will go and take my bias tape to turn the neckline of my dress and put in my hook and eye on the back yoke. You can also decide to add trimmings on the waistline. Whatever additional design you feel like adding to complement your dress, kindly do so. And thank you for sticking to the end of this video. The full look will be dropping on my Instagram account, my Pinterest, and other social platforms, so kindly do well to follow me for more updates. But till our next tutorials, bye bye.